You're tuned in to the MtG Cable Cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seat belts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable Cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal cast. Before I get started, I do want to give a shout out to that absolute legend of the MtG Finance subreddit that way back in the halcyon days of 2021 posted in the subreddit, I own over 700 Urza's baubles and will continue to buy more every week until they reach their fair market value at $10 each. Well, guess what? It finally happened. Congratulations, guy. You did it. It's awesome. Anyways, without further ado then, let's go ahead and get started with the topic, which we haven't done a check-in with us personally for a while on what our thoughts are. We've kind of grazed on it and like what we do for what. But yeah, it has been a minute.
Yep.
So this week, does organized play change anything for us personally? Like what we're doing locally for our players, what we're doing for our booths, how we're shifting around that. That's what we're covering today. So let's get started.
Yeah. So for me, actually, a lot of it comes cascading down from changes at the LGS level. As an individual dealer, there used to be an interesting organized space for people to play on Wednesdays, Modern on Wednesdays, and Legacy every other Sunday up here that will no longer be holding events. And the vendor that was working there and basically freelancing at my primary LGS is moving to Boston, so that opens up a hole. Friday at my primary LGS is Commander still. I do not believe they have picked up any constructed formats, and Pioneer, despite being a Pro Tour format, does not seem to be popular in paper yet. So overall, what I would be doing to support my local player base does not change in the immediate future, but that doesn't mean it won't. I believe Tuesday nights are Pioneer at the one LGS that holds non-commander paper events in a given week, and attendance for that seems to be basically MVP to hold an event. So what is that, like 6 people?
Yeah.
I think that's enough for a round-robin casual event, maybe 8. If things change, then I could absolutely see what I do changing in the future. But right now, when it comes to speculating and looking at Magic as a financial thing, I'm really just kind of holding tight to Commander because specs and trends are easier to read for Commander than anything else.
I think it's been really interesting because to me it's less what has had a bigger influence on me is less this announcement of organized play. It's been the shift back to in-person events, which this announcement does help emphasize. So it's become, now that we're having these more consistent events, I'm one of those guys that typically I'll take my payment in cards. I get a little bit of extra money that way, and it lets me satisfy my local markets with stuff that I don't necessarily want to sell at a discount in a booth. I've got my inventory. I may not want to sell it at 70% because I'm usually paying 60 to 65, and that's just not great margin if you put a value on your time. So for me, it hasn't really changed speccing much. I'm still slumlording it with the reserve list and Sarkhan's Unsealing and Unbound Flirt, like all those ones that I've doubled down on multiple times. I'm still speccing hard on those. But what's actually happened is my inventory has kind of shifted more towards, my show stock, so to speak, has shifted more towards Modern and Pioneer, with still, a fair amount of EDH stuff. And what I've been picking up as payment for events has literally just been like, hey, I'm getting X amount of stuff at this percentage. Send me your list and I'll have it for you at the end of the weekend. And What I've actually done is started to pare down my show inventory.
Okay.
Because now that I'm going to be doing more shows for other people, I'd much rather spend their money than mine.
Yeah, yeah.
That's usually the way to do it, especially if you don't want to dedicate a lot of time to it. So I've started paring a lot of that down, and I actually, the nice thing, and this was kind of a pick that I shouted out with Ren and Six, having these events means there are some real aggressive buy lists. So, pro tip, if Tales of Adventure is at an event, ask if Shohei is at the booth. He pays a lot of money for standard cards.
Mm-hmm.
They're a GP vendor who's paying money for standard cards.
Which is huge.
That's insane. But they're there. It provides an out. And it's allowed me to pare my personal inventory down to kind of cater it to like my 20 to 30 regular customers that I'm always the first person they hit up.
Yep.
They're like, hey, I need cards. Do you have them? So it's been a nice shift for me to be able to go more personal with it.
Oh, absolutely. I will say something that you mentioned in regards to your focus for your own personal inventory is kind of where I'm at right now, because I think I'm going to be able to double dip on it better than Pioneer, and that's I'm looking at modern staples. Yep. And I'm buying them from LGSs in the area or from individuals when I can.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, because Pioneer isn't really picking up in paper around here, it makes me feel like once the modern FNMs come back at the store I used to play at when they're done moving, and if this other LGS starts to hold more modern events outside of 5 p.m. starts on a Monday, I think that's where I'm really going to be able to serve my community better. And obviously, if I'm buying, fetches and shocks, like, sure, that also serves the EDH community, but yeah. I'm also looking at noteworthy playables, not just like Collected Company for the two people that want to play the Devoted Druid Heliod combo deck. I'm going wider. I want to go wider with like Urza's Sagas and Murktide Radiance, which is still a little narrow, but you have a Death Shadows deck in there. Things like that just kind of perform across the format that also aren't price prohibitive right now. Like, I think if I wanted to, I could have bought every Ragavan I've seen locally, wound up with like 8 or 10 out of cases, but at no point in time would I be able to get rid of them. People either already have their Ragavans because they've been out long enough, or they wouldn't be able to trade into them. They'd have to trade, quote unquote, too much to get there, and that, by all means, that's fine.
Yeah, and I think that's been kind of the interesting thing that this announcement has kind of done, and it's not just you and I; it's other people I've talked to. Yeah. They've kind of said, look, if I'm, not primarily selling on TCG. If this is like a side hustle for me and I'm not using it as my primary means of income, a lot of people have started going to like, I'm going to go more local.
Yeah.
Like I want to serve my local community because these are the people that are my bread and butter. And if they come to me before a TCG player, I just want to, take care of them.
Absolutely. There'll be 3 stores up here that can hold regional qualifiers.
Yeah.
And only 1 store that is actively selling singles. So I can definitely spackle that gap as needed. Because that store is basically just a buy and sell whatever walks through the door. And they end up selling a lot of their format staples for formats that matter to this guy.
Yep.
So, that kind of is what it is in that regard. I can just turn back around and trade it back to the players when they need it. It helps the store because it churns inventory, and it helps the players because I don't mind sitting on 14 Yavamayas.
Exactly.
Like, those will go to EDH players, those will go to modern players. It's not a big ask for me.
Yeah.
The one thing I will say that this is kind of done is it gets me back into the habit of reading like almost every card in a given set right now.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that the other day because we want to do our own episodes going back to set releases and things like that, and it's like I can't just skip around and look at the cards with like pushed class costs, so like 0 to 3, and then some chunky stuff like 5 to 7. I can't like cut that out. I have to read legitimately everything in a set now because it could have immediate implications, because there could be something that is underpriced at the end of the day, and that served us pretty well to call out. Not every EDH card has a realistic price because sometimes people are hyper focused on a number
Yeah.
of things, and that's happening with New Capenna right now. There are a lot of cards that people are hyper focusing on from the set, and that ripples down. And that's stuff we'll be touching on in the next couple of episodes. But that means that there are going to be some cards that fall through the cracks. So I'm looking for that subset of cards.
And I think that's, it's exciting almost, because you do get to focus on these subsets. It's like a new meta almost, where all of a sudden, we actually have we've had the arena meta, we've had the moto meta, but as we've seen event through event historically through Magic, paper meta is very drastically different often than the online meta. So now we have, all right, well, let's try to find these fringe playables, try to get on the tech, see if we have someone who's grinding for the Pro Tour, who's actively participating in these groups, who's doing these things that can give us the information and say, hey, let's do the thing. And it's a lot better, I think.
Yeah.
It's been very, very good.
That actually, everything you said just kind of dovetails into my next point, and it actually does speak to something that's going on up here. So people aren't playing Pioneer and Paper. My grinders, my Pro Tour players are playing on Moto. People are coming back, and the testing group that we have has been a buzz about Pioneer for the last couple of weeks. People people who haven't opened Moto in years. Where do I go to rent cards? Who's got promo codes? What should we be playing right now? Who's testing what? What does the format look like? What is underserved?
Yeah.
And so that group is coming back strong. But for me, for Pioneer, to look at my player base as a whole, I am setting up a 6-month plan for myself for Pioneer before I start speccing on it, because one of the most important things is what you just mentioned, is I have to divine my sources of format information. I can't just go in blind, and I can't just scatter shot. Without divining this information, speccing on Pioneer, like speccing on any other format, is difficult, and everything just becomes noise, and I don't know what to filter and what's real.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's important whenever we have not just an announcement like this, but anytime we have a shift in the game like this, which is really what this is. It's a shift, obviously, in how the game's going to be played. It's a shift in how the financial drivers work, because all of a sudden we actually do have paper Magic again.
Yep.
It's not just the EDH market. So, if you look back in our episode history, we'll periodically say, hey, here's the things that we're paying attention to. These are the things that we're looking at, that we're saying, hey, this is something we want to, use as a resource. Go back and listen.
Yeah.
See, what you used in the past that you may have gotten away from in the last 2 years, that all of a sudden, hey, this is really relevant again. Maybe we should look at this. And I think that that's something that goes a long way to kind of reacquainting you with the way things work in a paper meta. What has worked for you in the past? All right, do it again. We'll do it live. Who cares?
Exactly. I just need to find out now who's focusing on Pioneer, trying to...
Yeah.
I've been talking with some people, and I'm going back to Todd Anderson again, because Todd is now trying to bill himself as the Pioneer guy, and has been for a couple of months. Trying to follow somebody like Aspiring Spike is difficult, because Spike jumps from deck to deck, from idea to idea, from format to format, and is not kind of a specialist. At least while watching Todd, I get to watch Todd play usually established decks, unless he's doing a stipulation on stream, and he's always discussing the format, so it's very real. But I want to find more people like that. I don't need people writing about the format anymore. I can just watch games and people talk about the format and get exactly what I need from it, and then discuss it with people that are actually grinding, and that's going to do way more for me now than anything that I was doing before. And the biggest thing that I'm going to do in regards to Pioneer out in this period is actually going to be reviewing the box. I think it's like 600. It's a 600 count of all the cards that I've spec'd on for Pioneer. Either cards I pulled out that I've been picking up over time, like Bring the Lights. I had before Pioneer was a format, so they went in that box because it was a thing, right? Then Niv to Light became a deck on Arena, but nobody was playing in paper. And the ability to move The quantity that I had was very difficult because of the buy-in price.
Yeah.
But maybe in paper that deck comes back. Maybe
Yeah.
something pushes something else in the format, and that makes room for Niv Mizzet to come back. But it's going to be very important for me to go through that box and understand where it went wrong with cards that I actually bought to spec on. A good example is Hazoret the Fervent. Picked that card because a deck that was designed, Chonky Red, a Todd Anderson special that people cite as being an early pillar of the format, fell apart. The biscuit wheels just fell off that gravy train, and that Hazoret spec died on the vine. Now, I'm not unhappy that I picked up those cards. It's a loss, but it'll only be a loss for a certain amount of time. The rest of that box needs some help, though. And I need to figure out how to not make those same mistakes.
Yeah. And I think that's, when we talk about over the last couple of years, as we've had picks and we've said, hey, timeline is this, unless things accelerate.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we never mentioned, and this is an important, hey, mea culpa almost, is we didn't mention how format changes may affect things, because none of us expected Pioneer to be the card, right?
Yeah, the play. Yeah.
None of us thought Pioneer was coming back. We said on the podcast, at least I know I did, I'm like, Pioneer's dead. They don't care.
Yeah, because they didn't push it to Arena.
Yeah, they didn't push it to Arena, so why would we ever consider that this is a thing that they're going to go for? And lo and behold, they went for it. But I think for me, this has kind of not only changed my, obviously what I'm stocking, what I'm taking to shows, everything. It really has done a lot to change my philosophy of, okay, these, I'm super linear. This is the way it's going to be. I'm all in on this.
Yep.
This is what I'm thinking. This is how this will work. And it really has forced me to kind of go outside that and be like, nah, maybe not. I need to be mindful of these other changes that may happen, however unlikely, that they're going to say, hey, Pioneer's our format now. They still could. I can't deny that now, clearly, because it's the format.
Yeah. We have 8 months, 9 months before the Pioneer Pro Tour. And in that 6 months, in the first 6 months of that 8 is when I hope to learn more about Pioneer, to be able to look at that format and evaluate. Because to your point, format changes can come quickly, and the deeper a format, the longer it can take.
Yeah.
So Vintage and Legacy being the deepest formats, then Modern, then Pioneer. But Pioneer was a format that was in its heyday just riddled with bans. They just tore that format apart. If you look at the BNR announcement, and the announcements come as the first week in December, the third week in December kind of stuff. And I'm hoping that in this 6-month period, as people start to adapt Pioneer, maybe the announcement that we got today about a new format coming to Arena is Pioneer. WotC takes any corrective actions necessary to be able to create a very steady format through the next couple of set releases, where we can then basically adapt or adopt Pioneer into our existing speculation models and actually utilize this format properly, not just to make money from, but also better serve our clientele, either locally or remotely at events. Because at the end of the day, vending is all about serving your clientele. And if you're not able to do that, then you're just not doing it properly. You also can't bring all of Pioneer with you. So you got to make some choices, some informed choices. And if you don't have that information, you're not informed, then you just can't make the proper choices to bring X, Y, and Z to events. Lotus Field and Omniscience and Winota, that kind of stuff.
Sure, yeah.
But what else is out there? What else do you need to be mindful of? How is the format evolving or changing? Who do you need to talk to ahead of time to make sure that what you're ordering from the website or stocking your binders with is appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Important.
Yep.
And I think, too, one of the important things that you just said that I think I want to emphasize is you cannot bring all of Pioneer with you. You cannot bring all of a format. Something we talk about repeatedly. Pick your niche, go for it. Obviously you're going to cover the staples. Besides that, do you want to bring the uncommons? Do you want to bring the stuff that you can charge $5 for because people want it now? Or would you rather bring a little bit more EDH stuff? And I think that, as these events return, obviously it becomes much more important. And the incredibly interesting thing is, on the larger scale with vendors, okay, well, what kind of clientele can you expect in an event like Dreamhack, which isn't necessarily just your Pro Tour players? And that's something that for me is just fascinating to think about and, ruminate on.
Yeah.
So
Dreamhack is, when I think of Dreamhack and the vendors that would be there, it's going to operate more like NYCC or AX, where you are bringing in a physical game into a digital environment, and neither NYCC nor AX are gaming expos, but what they have there are demos and pros in those circuits. So when I went to NYCC, not only was Riot there with their giant booth where they would bring people out to play on stage, but Rare was there, and they had their booth was just a pedestal, a really squat pedestal, and on the top was a large display, and when people were at the booth, they were up top interviewing professional, and I'll put quotes around that word, Killer Instinct players, because it was the year that KI3 was coming out. Yeah. And the reason I put quotes around that is because the time between KI Gold and 3 was a decade and a half. So I don't know, the game wasn't at EVO. None of them were there until 3 happened. So I don't know where they found these people. Justin Wong, I think, is a native of New York City, so you just tap some people like that in some demo, right? But bringing Troll and Toad was there at NYCC. Troll and Toad was at Anime Expo, which is very similar. And that's what I think of when I think of Dreamhack, is just you're bringing in, that's the kind of event you're going to hold, where you're going to have digital demos of things. You're going to have professional players at these events. And then, oh, by the way, this physical card game is going to have some kind of presence. Yeah. And I know that was a really long, sidewindy way to get here, but that's what it was like. Yeah. Both of these, an Anime Expo and a Comic-Con, Riot was at both of them, and Rare was at NYCC demoing Killer Instinct 3. I think South Park was also there. They had set up one of the buildings. I think it wasn't a house. It might have been the school. Yeah. And you couldn't see what was going on. You had to go inside, but the Stick of Truth, I think, was the demo reel they were showing. Yeah. Inside. So you had these weird digital demos going on, and it just felt not out of place because that's my world. Mm-hmm. But if I was there as just an anime fan or somebody there to see the comic legends that were there that aren't my world, then it might feel weird and out of place. Yeah. And I kind of imagine that's what Dreamhack is going to be like the first time. But they've come out and said, hey, we have big plans for streaming this. And as far as I know, the only question about Dreamhack is, are they using Judge Academy or not to source their judges? Yeah. That's the only thing people seem to care about right now. Not, who are we bringing in? Who's going to gunsling? What does vending look like? Are you
going to have gunslingers? What's vending look like? Who's vending? Yeah. Even. They still have not posted a vendor list on their website as of yesterday. I haven't checked today.
It's in Atlanta, so I assume Super.
Yeah.
Unless Super Games says no, I can't imagine not bringing them in. But something like that's going to be huge, because that also sets expectations moving forward. Regionals was always an event where you had your captive audience and thus priced to do so.
Yeah.
Baneslayer Angel got its nickname heading into regionals and Nats. It was Wallet Slayer for a reason. And it is really interesting to see what people are going to do at those events too in terms of formats, because if Dreamhack is just here's the main, by the way, there are some sides for it, and then the entire time we're just going to fire off commander pods.
Right.
Do you care about bringing Pioneer and Modern for the sides to grind in to regionals, which we know will exist? But if Commander's going to fire all day long, do you just shove on Commander? I would expect so, but it's also Dreamhack, so maybe they'll do a Legacy or a Vintage event, because why the hell not?
May as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get the audience in.
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah, because all it requires at that point would be a ticket, and Dreamhack is in the business of making money. So
Exactly.
Why not? Dedicated badge, easy peasy. But yeah, for me, this is basically just a lot of studying. This puts me back in a spot where I need to spend a lot more time focusing on things. And that's really what my 4 big points are boiled down to.
Yeah, and I think for me it's studying and also starting the conversations with the locals again. Hey guys, what do you actually need?
Yep.
What do you want? And letting them know, hey, I'm here. I'm more mindful of this. What's going on? How do we work it out?
Absolutely. So, anything else before we head to picks?
Let's head to picks.
I am referencing Double Masters again, and I should remember when the set was printed, but I don't. It's fine. Irrelevant. Cool. So,
yeah.
I'm going first this week because I said so. Neither of us picked a rare, though.
No.
And I don't know if this is the first time it's happened or not, but here we are.
I think it's the first time we've both simultaneously not picked a rare for sure.
Yeah, and we both picked commons.
We did.
Yeah. Go us, Pauper. So I'm on Expedition Map this week. This is a card I've been watching for not too long. Yeah, about a year. It's one of the longest living cards on my list. And Expedition Map is just a card. It is ridiculous that it just doesn't get printed more, and the fact that it still has the kind of demand it does is insane, because they just don't reprint this thing. So right now we are at a bit of a plateau for the Zendikar version, which is what I'm looking at. We did have a recovery in price after the Double Masters printing in August of 2020. That's what the huge downturn was, right around July. Cratered from 2XM, and we're finally recovering on market, which is great. That's where we want to be. Initially, CK was buying 86 at $1.15. TCG, there's 216 on the open market, $158. $1.58. Right now, CK is buying 161 at $1.50, up just a little bit on both accounts from 176 and $1.40, and they're 189 at $1.75 on TCG Player. So all in all, we're going up where we need to and down where we need to kind of move this forward as a spec. So, as expected for EDH, this card is played in any deck that wants to ensure they can find their quote-unquote land package or highly impactful lands at any given time. It's an artifact, so it just goes in everything.
Yeah.
I believe this card is actually underutilized across the format. Currently, it shows its best pairings are in mono black decks, obviously to fetch Coffers or Urborg, or in mono red to fish up Valakut, because that's what you do. Instead, however, it should see more play in decks that run lands like Nykthos, or Thespian Stage Dark Depths, Channel Lands, or any of the myriad of utility, dual, or tri-lands within the format. Adoption of the card, lower than we would expect, but I do believe this is part of the feedback loop on Rec, which is playing against us this time, finally. But as more interesting lands continue to show up that people want to guarantee they hit instead of employing the we'll get there when we get there strategy, we'll see the rate we expect. So just the adoption rate. So, good. You got something?
I was going to say, I think the feedback loop, not just on EDH rec, but also just the general bias of this card as a Tron card.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought when I was looking at this. My first thought was like, oh, this goes in Tron, and you just played in Tron. And I was like, wait, no, this just goes in everything. And the reason I don't have it in everything is because I don't own enough to put it in everything, which is a me problem, not a this card problem.
Facts.
Right? Like, I don't play it in Elves. It gets Cradle. Like, I just don't know what you're doing. Like, why is this only
literally gets everything?
Yeah, like you take a look at Rec, and it's just literally paired with black generals and like a couple of red generals, but then you see like tricolor lands in here for some reason. So I just think something's going on. It's whatever's going on is under the surface, and thus it shows up as being underutilized overall. Yeah. So timeline for this card, as I pointed out, UMA sent this into a tailspin from a $4 card down to a $2 card. It basically halved it. So that lasted about 8 months, and we're finally starting to recover from that. So with the rest of the Triumphs coming in New Capenna and people still finding utility in all the channel lands, specifically the channel lands, I expect this to begin moving after Commander Legends and prior to the new year, once trepidation about a reprint has lifted, because we're going to see Commander Legends, we're going to see like the rest of the Commander decks come through, and we're going to get Double Masters, which is where this card was last printed.
And I don't think, I mean, who knows? WotC has done crazier things. I don't think we'll see it in Double Masters back-to-back. Could be wrong.
Yeah, it was...
I mean, we had Dread, what was the Dinosaur? And what, 4 straight standard sets? So maybe. But I would think not.
And Modern Masters, too, because they got the Colossal... Oh, no, so the Phantasmal...
Colossal Dreadnought.
They got the Phantasmal reprint thing. The other interesting thing about its appearance in Double Masters is that it got the full art treatment alongside all the other Tron pieces. Yeah. So that could have been why it was included in there, but that's just kind of chintzy. So I agree with your point. I doubt we'll see it again. I think it was just there for the box topper kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that timeline, that trepidation about reprint, is about 4 to 8 months from now, because if we don't see it in Commander Legends, probably not going to get it in any of the standard sets or the Commander products. This is untethered essentially, so we could hit a reprint in a standard set, but I doubt it.
We do now have the full Commander Legends spoiler, I believe, just about, and I think it's been crunched out.
Oh, that's right. You sent me that. Yeah, I didn't look at the crunch.
Yeah, I think we're safe, which is good.
So a reprint equity, over time, this card seems to have found a home in supplemental sets and only supplemental sets with a high density of utility lands. So it was reprinted in Modern Masters 2015 and Double Masters, both of which were just rife with utility lands from things like the Karu lands, the Ravnica Bounce lands in Modern Masters 2015, to the Tron pieces and the creature lands in Double Masters. And when you look at those sets, they are overwhelmingly non-basic land heavy. So I really don't expect this to be in a set that doesn't have a ton of non-basics, which is good for us in regards to reprint equity. As far as buy quantity is concerned, between utility and constructed formats and Commander, I feel perfectly fine stacking 10 to 15 play sets of these at their current price and outing them over time. There is no Commander player that can't use these, and while you can only play one per deck, most Commander players have more than one deck. So it's unlikely most of my other unlike most of my other Commander-focused picks, trading multiples to one player is a definite possibility. And then you pointed out already, this is a Tron card, and you play 4 in Tron. So again, that's a play set immediately. This is probably one of the easiest specs to churn at quantity and trade that I think I've picked on a long time.
For sure. And I think, something that I would like to see is, and I expect to see, is the continued adoption of this card because of the channel lands. Mm-hmm. Because it literally tutors it to your hand, and you just get to use it right away. I mean, what's not to love about that effect? Mm-hmm. I get to tutor up Boseiju and kill your Trinisphere or whatever in EDH.
Otawara, bounce your stuff,
Iganjo, all the good stuff. Like whatever you need to do, you can tutor it up with extra utility for these channel lands, which typically most land tutors, one, are sorcery speed, and two, if they're instant speed, it's usually a fetch land or something that's going to fetch it into play, like Crop Rot. So this occupies a really unique, like, niche for these new cards that we're getting. And granted, Channel is currently, I believe, tied to the plane. That doesn't mean it's going to stay that way forever. I would imagine this is the kind of keyword that Wizards is going to look at in a little bit and say, let's revisit this as evergreen. See what happens.
Yeah, it's weird. It's no longer chained to anything specific like a lot of things in the old Kamigawa set were like Soul Shift and that dumb one that said you couldn't cast any more spells, you had to keep casting Epic. Yeah. Stuff like that I think was tied to the plane.
Yeah, this is one that seems like it's not Soul Shift was specific to spirits. Like flavor-wise, it's not specific to this. So I think we could see some good growth there.
I hope so. Your common.
Yes, my common. Foil Deadly Dispute. This is one of the most powerful draw cards Black has had in a while. Obviously, we just got Reckoner's Bargain out of Kamigawa. The reason that I think, in particular, Deadly Dispute is so powerful is because you get the treasure out of it. It's 1 mana, draw 2 to 3 cards, depending on the artifact you're sacrificing. At instant speed, get a treasure token.
2 mana, but
yeah, well, if with a treasure token, it's almost like
so you get the 1 back,
Got
it.
I'm specifically picking the foil. Why? Well, it was in collector boosters, and as we know, collector boosters tended to devalue foils across the board. The interesting thing at this card specifically is if you look at the foil delta to non-foil on TCG Player, it's like 60 cents market. In terms of, like 40 cents market. In terms of listing difference, though, it's less than half. Now, the really interesting thing about this, and I like full transparency, that may turn some people off is if you look at the Card Kingdom buy list, right now they're paying $278 for the non-foil on up to basically unlimited quantity because it's a common, and they're paying $220 on the foil, and they only want 4. So a little bit less movement there, but this is the kind of thing that once it starts seeing play in EDH, once people start adopting it in Modern more, those are formats where people tend to foil out. So I think you're looking at a longer, a better return on those and maybe a little bit more liquidity. The reason being, it's a foil common. That's easy to foil out.
Yeah.
It's also about the price of the non-foil. Well, given the choice, if I'm in a singleton format or if I'm in an eternal format where I'm basically foiling all my stuff out anyways, obviously I'm going to go that route. So in terms of playsets or depth, currently I just picked up 13 of them earlier this week because that was all that was listed for under $4 and 50 cents with shipping. We've started to see listings. When I killed that quantity, we were at 42 listings. We now have 38 of those. So another 4 disappeared. Now, the interesting thing is that of those 38, 34 are near mint LP, as we'd expect from a standard set. In terms of timeline, this is where it gets really interesting. So we did just get Reckoner's Bargain.
Yep.
I don't think we're going to see this card reprinted for a long time because what they've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years is iterating on this concept. Granted, treasures are evergreen. So we may see it in one of the later sets. I would expect, just because of the way rotation is going to work, we probably wouldn't see it in Dominaria. We may see it in Brothers War. We may see it in Universes Beyond Lord of the Rings, just because flavor-wise, there's a few times where Deadly Dispute would make sense in the storyline if they decide to do it. Assuming we clear those reprints, what we've seen from staple commons like this in the past is you're looking at about an 8 to 10 month range before you start to see a sizable growth return of about 15-20%. So timeline, you're looking at about a year. I wouldn't want to go more than 4 or 5 playsets deep, just because, all right, at like $5 a piece, you know, we're looking at $100.
Yep.
That's what I want to park on a spec like this, throw it in a box, forget about it. So timeline in terms of return, if we do dodge that, 8 to 12 months is when you'll see a profitable return for trade. So this is a little bit more long term. Now, in terms of buy list, that's anybody's guess. Again, transparency, full disclosure, with the way Card Kingdom's buy list looks, with the way Star City's buy list looks, it may be a bit before we see a buy list return on this. But this is the kind of card that, at least anecdotally, I've had a lot of people locally asking at stores, hey, do you guys have Deadly Disputes? Especially Pioneer. Red-black mid-range is a deck. Black is one of the most powerful colors in the format. Maybe some new decks come out that take advantage of this and want to abuse this.
Yeah, it plays well in the sacrifice stuff.
Yeah, it's just a really good all-around utility card that I think sees a lot of potential.
Yeah.
And I think for $4 to $5, park it for a year. See what happens. Worst case, I don't think it goes down.
No.
But at $100, I mean, if I get 60 buy list out of it at the end, I'm fine recycling that into credit and moving it into a better spec. Who knows? Just think it's an interesting, powerful effect that can see play. And like we were talking about, Pioneer, which has been announced, so now we have to pay attention to this. This could be one of those like tech cards that grows from that format outside of adoption in your traditional Eternal formats like Modern or Pauper or something like that.
I'm glad you picked up on Pauper, because that is actually the most common format this is played in as a 4X. Then like some amount of Pioneer and Historic, because like the Jund Sacrifice deck is kind of the same, or the Rakdos Sacrifice deck is kind of the same. In both of those formats. The other thing that plays into this, and I don't know how well it plays into the foil, is the treasures theme coming down the pike in New Capenna, and the obvious interactions with Revel and Riches, and a lot of the treasure payoffs that are contained within the set as a whole, just pushes this card kind of naturally. Whether that speaks to the foil or not, I don't know. But again, to your point, the delta in the foil and non-foil being so small means you can probably trade out the foil to people, even if they're not even if they're not looking for it.
Yep.
Just to get out of it. As far as timelines go, I absolutely. The only concern I have is whether or not we need to expect this to move faster and just be ready for it, because of the ability to play it in an already established archetype in Pioneer.
That's fair,
because as that format, or Pauper, if that picks up in paper, right? So that's another thing you got to pay attention to. So I think the parking it is fine, paying attention to it, fine. You just have to decide what you want to do, but I think there's opportunity to churn this faster than we might think.
For sure, yeah, that's definitely a valid point as well.
But yeah, other than that, I like it. Doomblade iterations are always interesting, and this is probably one of the more unique ones with the least downside, or the lowest downside. The no claws, really, because you're sacrificing a creature to do this. So I like it as a pick overall, definitely. Got anything else for us this week?
That'll do it for me.
One day you will, and it'll be glorious. But
it will.
We will see everybody next week. We are at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at HaltIamReptar. You are
at Thirsty Sizzler.
See you next week.